Nazis. They're essentially a synonym for evil. And, of course, no one's worse than Hitler. But the Japanese in World War II were every bit as horrific as the Germans. In many ways, worse. Their military murdered prisoners for sport, raped hundreds of thousands of women and girls. They froze babies alive in human medical experiments. How did Japan escape the blame that Germany got for World War II? I've wondered about it for a long time, and I've decided to dig in and see what I could learn. Japan's war machine killed up to 30 million people, most of them civilians. It includes millions of Chinese civilians, POWs, Korean slaves, whole towns wiped out. But it's not just the numbers that are horrific. It's also what they did to people before they killed them. In 1937, Japanese troops rolled into China's capital and unleashed 6 weeks of sadism that we know as the Rape of Nanking. They held public beheading contests to see who could kill the fastest. Soldiers raped women in front of their families, then carved them open with bayonets. Pregnant mothers were gutted. Infants were thrown in the air and caught on swords. One witness described a girl, no older than 9, raped by more than 20 men in a single night and then impaled with a bamboo spear. Estimates say between 200 and 300,000 people were slaughtered. It was so awful that even Nazis stationed in the city wrote panicked reports back to Berlin begging someone to intervene. I mean, think about that for a minute. And Nanking wasn't even the worst of it. In northeast China, Japan set up a secret facility called Unit 731. It ran from the mid-1930s to the end of the war. Inside, Japanese scientists, they dissected the victims alive with no anesthesia at different points during the disease to study its progression. They removed organs one by one to see how long a body could keep going. One case involved a frostbite experiment on a 3-day-old infant. Another used POWs to test flamethrowers and grenades. People's arms were frozen and shattered with hammers. Some prisoners were tied to stakes while plague bombs full of infected fleas were dropped overhead. And then, hundreds of thousands of people, mostly Chinese, died from the plague bombs developed by that unit. The lab also used Russians, Koreans, and American POWs as test subjects, and virtually none of them survived. On a broader level, the Japanese military essentially industrialized sexual slavery. Around 200,000 women, mostly Korean and Chinese, were kidnapped or tricked into becoming comfort women. They were raped dozens of times a day, beaten, and worse. There's evidence of teenagers with shattered pelvises, girls who died from infection, suicide, or simple exhaustion. One survivor described being forced to service 40 men in 24 hours. And if you were a soldier captured by the Japanese, the outcome wasn't much better. On the Bataan Death March in 1942, Japanese guards bayoneted anyone who stumbled. Thousands died on the road. Those who made it to prison camps faced starvation, disease, beatings, and slave labor. Here's some perspective. The death rate for Allied POWs under Nazi control was about 4%. The death rate in Japanese custody, about 30%. And for Chinese soldiers, there were no POW camps at all because most were executed on the spot. Germany's gas chambers became a symbol of industrial evil. But Japan's crimes were more intimate, physical, even gleeful. And most of the war criminals never faced any kind of recompense. After the war, top Nazi leaders were dragged into court, paraded before the world, hanged. Swastikas and other Nazi symbols are still banned in Germany. And Japan did have some war trials, but that ended up executing 7 people, including Tojo. But by 1958, every other convicted war criminal was set free. And some of the worst offenders were never even tried. Watanabe, the POW commander who tortured Zamperini, he was listed as number 23 on General MacArthur's most wanted criminals list. That list was public, his crimes were known. But he hid out for a few years, then reemerged in Japan as a free man, working in insurance. In 1998, he sat down for an interview where he didn't really feel sorry for anything, and he died at the age of 85 without ever seeing a hint of punishment. That was the pattern with a lot of the perpetrators. Unit 731's leadership was never prosecuted. In 1946, U.S. intelligence struck a secret deal, and the scientists and leaders got full immunity in exchange for their germ warfare research. The data was classified and later used as a foundation for the U.S. bioweapons program. Emperor Hirohito, who presided over all of it, he got a pass as well. Germany got never again, and the country spent decades apologizing, educating, confronting its past. But Japan got a clean slate. And it's not just the Japanese public that moved on. Our memories of Americans and others throughout the world have gotten fuzzy too. Allies made filming Nazi atrocities a top priority. Military photographers shot hours of footage at concentration camps. They showed piles of corpses, mass graves, gas chambers, and the living dead. Survivors told their stories on camera. The Allies recorded the horrors as evidence for war crimes and for our collective memory. But the Pacific theater was different. It was jungle warfare with enemies that looked nothing like us. Photos and testimony from that time, they exist, but the original film footage is rare, and most of it shows a general aftermath, not the actual atrocity. Asian victims also didn't resonate the same way. Wartime propaganda dehumanized the entire region of race. Orientals was the term used to lump Chinese civilians and Japanese soldiers into one large, blurry category, and it dulled the outrage. Americans didn't see Asians as fellow Westerners under siege. They saw a different battlefield, filled with people they didn't understand and that they just didn't care as much about. For decades, U.S. history books covered Pearl Harbor, Midway, and the atomic bombs in vivid detail. But we got maybe a sentence or two on Japanese aggression, even less about the horror. Until the late 1990s, most Americans had never heard of Unit 731. When Irish Chang published The Rape of Nanking in 1997, it felt like a shocking expose because it was. The story had been missing from the syllabus for 50 years. Meanwhile, the Holocaust became a foundation of World War II education. Every American student knows the name Auschwitz and Dachau. Hardly anyone knows Pingfang, the town where Unit 731 operates. Another factor to consider is that most of Hollywood's powerful studio heads were Jewish immigrants, some of them refugees. Telling the story of Nazi evil was personal. So we got dozens of European war movies, Holocaust films, documentaries, and memoirs. Entire genres were built on it. By contrast, Pacific War films were rare. Movies like Empire of the Sun or Unbroken came decades later, but few had the impact of the European War, and there was certainly never an equivalent to Schindler's List. And that leads us to nuclear synergy, which helped Japan pull off a rare transformation from brutal empire to global victim. In August 1945, the U.S. dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Japan, first on Hiroshima, then Nagasaki. Tens of thousands of people died instantly, and tens of thousands more suffered and died from radiation in the weeks that followed. Those bombs didn't just end the war, they rewrote the story of what happened before. The images of charred school children, shadows of vaporized bodies, and burn victims stumbling through rubble, they were unforgettable. And the country that butchered its way through Asia became seen by many as the first victim of nuclear war, and Japan leaned into that hard. Once the U.S. occupation ended, the Japanese government built a national identity around peace and atomic suffering. Every August, Hiroshima hosts a solemn ceremony with speeches, lanterns, doves. It's treated as a uniquely tragic event in world history, which it is. But it also overshadows what Japan did before 1945. Even visiting diplomats follow the script. They lay wreaths at the Hiroshima Peace Memorial, but they rarely acknowledge Japan's horror. And inside Japan, that narrative stuck as well. Surveys show citizens are far more likely to recall the firebombings of Tokyo or the A-bomb attacks than any atrocities they committed. Nazis. They're essentially a synonym for evil. And, of course, no one's worse than Hitler. But the